For the record, what's on your ballot? For voters in the city of Madison, there are a number of council races and 4 referenda questions dealing with the makeup of the city council. They are all advisory. John Strange is an assistant city attorney who helped come up with the wording on the ballot. The first question they'll see is about alder pay. The second question will be about council size. Should it be increased or reduced from the 20 that it currently is? And then the third question on term, either 2 or 4 years. And then finally, a question on term limits. John, what can you tell us about what kind of triggered this advisory referendum? And we should point out it is advisory.
That's correct. It is an advisory referendum. And what triggered it really was in 2017, the city recognized that it hadn't done a full review of the government structure since really the 80s, and that the city had grown and gotten more diverse since that time. There was also the 2020 census that was going to be happening, and the attachment of the town of Madison in 2022. So the city really wanted to take a look at its structure and ask sort of some basic questions about what kind of changes could be made that might make the city structure work better for all of its residents, and that's kind of what triggered what became the Task Force for Government Structure, and that was an 11-member task force that met over 90 times for a couple of years, analyzed all kinds of different parts of government structure, including the topics that are the subject of these 4 referendum questions. And so really this referendum is kind of an extension of that project, going straight to the voters and getting feedback from the voters on these really important and complicated questions.
We won't get too into the weeds on the specifics of each question, but the first one, people are going to see the dollar figures, and that always makes people's eyes open when they see dollar figures. And current alders make 13.7. The recommendation or the thing they're voting for would be the possibility of raising their salary for council members from a range of $45,000 to $71,000, which is based on a percentage of median Dayton County income. How did you guys come up with that figure, those numbers?
Well, the council, when the task force looked at this, and then as the council was asking the question, it looked at really what would be the positive outcome of transitioning to a full-time council, something where the salary that was made could support as a one-job kind of job. As you know now, the council members, most of them have second jobs, and yet they're having to do an enormous amount of work when it comes to constituent services, getting ready for meetings, attending meetings, and so it was really a question of what kind of salary could make this a job that would be more open to more people within the city. And it looked not just at it looked at socioeconomic diversity. It looked at things like lived experience diversity and what kind of a salary could be able to support a person who may want to do this job who might not be able to do it just as a second job because of financial circumstances.
I think the other questions are pretty self-explanatory in terms of term limits, or you touched on the size of council in terms of the city and how it's grown. And the term limits question, that comes up at the national level. You hear people talking about that with Congress all the time. Finally, when we talk about an advisory referendum, a lot of people are familiar with advisory referendums on the state level, whether it's medicinal marijuana or whatever. How will the city process this and take the results of this and work with it?
Sure. Well, each of these items would require further action to do, and in the advisory referendum, they'll get the responses, and obviously, depending on the response rate, be able to gauge what the city's interested in pursuing that rank. Just for an example, changing the size of the council from 20 to some other number would require a future binding referendum. So, in fact, this would have to go back out and actually have a binding referendum with the voters to actually make that change. From this advisory referendum, the city can gauge whether the voters are initially interested in that, and whether they're interested in keeping it the same, increasing or reducing the size. So it can kind of help them take that next step to deciding whether to go back with a binding referendum. So really, I think they'll look at the percentages and decide what kind of next steps to take.
And that's this week's edition of For the Record. Remember to vote on April 6th. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of this warm Sunday.